Hi, my name is Dan Zeilinger, and I have been a world-traveling full-time trad jazz musician for the past 40 years. Some of my most memorable performances were on the lawn of the Edinburgh Castle, at Imperial Palace in Japan, as well as TV shows and commercials across the world. I've met many people during my career and have spent many hours on stage and off with these musicians, talking about jazz, life, and more. Some are touring musicians, some are theme park warriors, and some are casual musicians who play on the weekends with friends. I think they all have stories worthy of a movie script, and through these interviews, I'll be sharing them with you. Hi there, this is Dan Zeilinger with Trad Jazz Today, and my next guest, I'm going to take a little time to do this introduction because I've interviewed some of the heavies in Dixieland throughout the nation, and in fact across the world. I've interviewed some people who are the #1 studio calls in Hollywood, and my kids don't really care. But when I tell them that I'm interviewing Mudge from the Poxy Boggins, they lost their mind. They said, "You're doing what?" Anyway, and that's this gentleman, Mr. Jerry Wheeler. Hey, Jerry.
Hello, how are you?
My kids went crazy.
That's funny.
When they found out, well, they're a Renaissance fair kids. You know, they come out and watch the bands, and they know you very well as far as what you do out there.
Nice.
And what my introduction is absolutely accurate. I've interviewed John Van Houten, who's on every movie score for the last 30 years, and I've interviewed people. I've interviewed a violinist who has a ragtime band in Hungary, and they were sort of.
Yep.
And I say, I'm interviewing Mudge. They went, what? So.
No, John Van Houten actually was very supportive of the band and likes the band. So I believe he's seen us. So.
Oh, John's a great guy.
Yeah.
He and I met actually. He actually played tuba in a Lou Waters style Dixie band back in the 80s, and I was playing trumpet at the time. And that's where he and I met. And we just stayed friends ever since. Mm-hmm. So there. Okay.
Well, no, the thing is, I don't know if this is part of the interview, but I grew up in Cyprus, and he grew up in Orange County, and so he was just. I think he's a little older, but he's one of those musicians that we were just always, had friends in common. I think he went to Cal State Long Beach.
Yes, he did.
I went to Cal State Fullerton, but we just had so much overlap over the years of friends and stuff.
Oh yeah, he's so approachable and such a nice guy. It's crazy.
Yeah, our careers took different divergent paths. That's fun.
Now, did you go to Lexington?
I went to Oxford Junior High School.
Oh, you're one of those kids.
Yeah, and well before it was Oxford Academy, and then I went to Cypress High School, and then from there to Cal State Fullerton.
I was trying to remember who was the band director at Cypress when you were there.
Wayne Nilsson.
Oh, it was Wayne. Wayne ended up being my son's junior high director when he went over to Walker.
Okay. Yep.
So yeah, I know Wayne well.
I was, one of those. It's so funny. I had a fantastic jazz education, and when I was at Cypress High School, we had a series of jazz concerts put on by students at Cal State Long Beach. So I was taking lessons from Rick Hahn. Do you know Rick?
Yeah.
Okay. I was taking lessons from Rick Hahn at the time, and he and his partner, Jay Green, I can't remember, but a partner of his, they produced a series of concerts at Cypress High School where they used Jay Anderson on bass, somebody Cox on piano.
Alan.
They had a rhythm section that was just out of this world. And they would bring in jazz greats and they'd play at my high school. And I thought this was normal. I was just a kid growing up. And we had people like Frank Rosalino and Bill Watrous, of course I remember the trombone players, Blue Mitchell, some great saxophone players who I unfortunately didn't identify with as much and forgot. But we had a fantastic jazz series in high school, and I really took it for granted.
Yeah.
And so
now,
he was a great band director, even though at the time you're a kid, all you do is complain. So.
Now, did your first foray into improvisation happen in high school?
Well, not really. The legend in my family is I could whistle before I could talk. Okay. And so I used to I was like extremely musical. My parents, neither one were professional musicians, but they both sang beautifully. My dad had a guitar, and we would just sing around the house. When I grew up, we got a piano, and we'd still sing around the house. And so I just started making music on anything I could as a kid. You know, the first musical instrument I had was maracas. And
Wow.
I was like 5 and 6 years old, just playing along with Herb Alpert records, you know, Taste of Honey and all those.
I just like that. I just like that album cover. So.
Exactly. That's the one it comes to mind, you know. And so I just grew up singing and playing. And so I was kind of, and even when I started taking music lessons in school, I could never just play what I was supposed to. I was always noodling and making up my own stuff. So I started trying to improvise just as a little kid, just, you know, just playing along with the records and having a great time. And so by the time I got actually into a band program, I started on violin in 3rd grade officially. And then when I went to Oxford, Oxford did not have an orchestra. We were not one. Lexington did, but I did, you know, Oxford did not. So I spent the first semester of 7th grade playing glockenspiel, trumpet, drums, and I'd always wanted to play trombone, but they had trombonists. And then he gave me tuba, and I hated playing tuba, no offense. It was just.
Oh, no, not taken.
And so then I said, I really want to play trombone. And then I got a trombone and never looked back, you know.
Yeah.
The director at Oxford at the time, who I will thank him, was Sid Viles, if you know.
Oh, Sid. He was my son's elementary school teacher.
Okay. And the year I started.
Sid Viles, Aaron.
The year I started junior high school, which I believe was 73, 74, was his first year teaching.
He was an interesting guy.
Oh, he is an interesting guy. I hope he's still fine. And
he was actually an ex-Kingsman drum and bugle corps. I'm a drum and bugle corps guy.
Do you know David Weinberg? Anyway.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah, I went to high school with David.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I know David really well.
Anyway, no, I grew up knowing Dave very well, and we haven't. You know, once again, people grow up.
Before we go on, my kids would never forgive me if I don't ask you one question. Are you wearing pants?
I am. I don't have to, but I am.
When my son freaked out this morning, he played me your commercial that of course they sang that on.
Yeah.
And then he went and he looked up the actual group playing it also. And so
okay.
I've been immersed into your Renaissance Fair band this morning.
Our interesting little bit of history for that Dockers commercial, which is the group I'm in. We sing one of our favorite songs or biggest hits is a song called "I Wear No Pants," and for some reason the Dockers people heard about us and they built an ad campaign around that song, which they used on a Super Bowl commercial one year. And that first Super Bowl commercial featuring that ad was the very first advertisement that you could use your phone and zoom it. So if you held up your phone and zoomed that commercial, it would take you to an advertisement for Dockers pants and enter you in a contest. And so I think we were the first commercial application of that commercial was the first commercial application of Zoom for an advertisement.
So you don't know when you or how they got your name for that?
I don't know. No, they some R&I guy or some research guy heard it. They fell in love with it, and then they contacted Stuart Venable, who is our fearless leader, and arranged it all. So he might know how they found him. I don't remember how they found him.
Well, you know, you and I have talked quite a bit at Curly's when you come out and play. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting that we've talked about the fact that my kids all went to Kennedy, which was your rival school, of course.
Yeah.
You know, there's quite a history there between those two.
Yeah, my cousins though went there. I was not one of the rabid anti-Kennedy people, and Yeah, yeah.
Who were your teachers when you got into Fullerton?
Well, the funny thing is, you know, I've always been kind of a strange guy and reactionary kind of guy, and I should have gone to Long Beach because they had the better jazz program, and that was what I was more interested in. But I weigh 120 pounds less than I used to. I used to be quite heavy, and I did not want to march.
Big brown machine, yeah.
Yeah, I had heard that regardless of your major, if you're a music major playing a band instrument, your first year you're going to have to, especially if you wanted to be in one of the better jazz ensembles, you pretty much had to be in those bands.
Right.
And I did not want to march ever again in my entire life, which is so ironic because once I started working as a professional, I ended up doing parades a couple times.
Oh yeah.
But I opted to go to Cal State Fullerton because I would never have to march there. Because they didn't even have a football team back then, I don't think.
No, I don't think so.
They do now, and I think they even built a stadium instead of a new arts building at one point. But they eventually built the arts building. They have a beautiful performing arts theater now, which they didn't when I went there. But so I just chose there because I didn't want to march. And then I ended up discovering and falling in love with the classical world. So it really worked out nice. I was not a big classical fan before then. I'd listened to, when I was a violin major in third grade, my mom bought me a bunch of Mozart and Beethoven records, but honestly, they were never my favorites. But I went there and that's where I actually fell in love with early music. One of the great, and the funny thing is, the jazz teacher that influenced me the most in early music, do you know Andy Charlton?
Sure.
Andy? Yeah.
I knew of him. I didn't know him personally.
Andy Charlton was this fantastic educator, and he was a top call woodwind guy in Hollywood back then. He also was he was a commercial arranger for movies and stuff. I'm trying to remember the vocal quartet from the 50s and 60s that he used to do all the arrangements for. I can follow that up and put that in the notes for YouTube.
It wasn't Singers Unlimited or one of those groups, was it?
Well, it was something like that, but no, it was a 4-piece. In fact, I think they did an album that I could probably go over to the shelf and find that was the 4-something and trombones, and it was a jazz album with vocals and trombone. But anyway, Andrew Charlton, besides being one of the top-notch jazz guys in town, got his doctorate in early music. And he led the Collegium Musicum at Cal State Fullerton. And I basically took that because Cal State Fullerton at the time had 2 facsimile sackbuts, beautiful instruments. And I was a music major, and I was suggested that and because he didn't teach the jazz ensembles, but he did teach the arranging classes there.
For the people who are watching that don't understand sackbut, why don't you explain that instrument a little bit?
Sackbut is basically an early trombone. A trombone hasn't really changed designs since about the 1300s. The earliest examples of a trombone date back to the proto-Renaissance medieval period. And anyway, it's almost exactly the same as a trombone, except now this is a fake one, but the bell is smaller. It doesn't have the full bell that they hadn't technologically. They'd figured out how to get 2 interlocking tubes to do a slide, but they hadn't, gotten the technology and the technique to have the wider flared bell.
In fact, most of the original ones don't even have a bead around the bell, right?
Some of them don't.
They
some
just
of them
stop.
do. They figured it out. I think they figured out how to do that, perhaps. I don't know. Don't quote me.
It's okay.
I have a reference book right over here that will help. But in fact, for all the trombone players out there, if you don't have The Trombone by, let's see what his name is, Trevor Herbert. This is the latest book that every trombone player, it is the authoritative book now on trombone history, I believe. But anyway.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. So trombone, the basic trombone hasn't changed in about 900 years. 7. My math is poor. And so anyway, I got into early music studying under Andrew Charlton. And he also had me learn recorder and Renaissance drums. And the first time I'd ever gone to the Renaissance Fair, I was in junior high school, though, at Oxford, and totally fell in love with that entire scene, you know. And so I was kind of, even though I had never really thought about playing that early music much at that point, I had been exposed to it at the Renaissance Fair. And then I had the opportunity to study with Andy, and I was in his collegium for a few years at Cal State Fullerton. And then I just, I don't know, every chance I got, I went. And some more of my musical background is when I got to Cal, well, this leads right into going back to where I went to school. I went to Cal State Fullerton, and that was also the year that Jeff Reynolds had returned as the head of their brass department. And for decades, he's still probably a member of the Moravian Church. He's retired and moved, I believe, to Washington State. But he led the Moravian Trombone Choir in Downey for decades, and he built it. The Moravian Church is a pre-Reformation Protestant church. So before Martin Luther King nailed up his complaints with the Catholic Church and started the official Reformation, I think a couple hundred years before that, there was a man named Jan Hus from Moravia, which is now part of Czechoslovakia. There's a statue of Jan Hus in the famous square in Prague, which I got a chance to go to in my life. And the leader of that church was martyred in, I think, the 1400s, 12, something like that. He was martyred, and because it was even before, anyway, for hundreds of years in ancient Europe, there was horrible wars between Catholics and Protestants. Entire communities were eliminated. And so they weren't called the Moravian Church then. I think they were called the Brethren or something, Brethren, you know, a fellowship. Right. And they basically went on the run. But part of like their church was, I think they same sort of things Martin Luther wanted. I think they wanted the Bible in the vernacular. They liked music. They liked common people to do music. But when you're on the run, you can't run around Europe hiding from people with organs, you know? Yes. But you can with trombones. So very early in their church music was became a trombone consort. And they had, you know, the Moravian Trombone Choir at our height with the most instruments we ever had. We had an E-flat sopranino trombone made by Larry Minnick.
Okay.
Larry Minnick.
Sure.
And all the way to, I don't know, huge contrabass trombones. I think the biggest one was in G. I'm not sure. Someone can fact check me. And but it was just a glorious ensemble at its height. It's still, once again, the trombone choir, the oldest continuous music ensemble in America is the Moravian Trombone Choir in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And they've been playing church services since the 1700s. I believe that church has been around. And, you know, that group has been in existence. In fact, there's one of my favorite stories about the Moravian Trombone Choir is allegedly back in the 1700s when there wasn't much in Pennsylvania and there was still just a settlement. The Indians, the local Native Americans, wanted to attack because once again, these European invaders were just a pain. And so they were going to attack the church, but then they heard the trombone choir inside playing and practicing. And then they described it as, you know, we heard the voice of God and decided not to attack, you know. And that's paraphrasing, I'm sure.
Oh, sure, I understand.
a Moravian scholar is going to say I got it all wrong, but that's the story the way I remember it, and it's a very.
I think the truth is the Indians showed up and they were just glad you didn't have accordions.
It could be that too. I think it's how they came from Eastern Europe. No.
Almost every trombone player I know in the area has at one time or another played through a brass choir for that church.
Oh, absolutely, and that's one of the wonderful traditions of Southern California. Unfortunately, the congregation was getting older and not attracting newer members, and they have since actually sold the church in Downey and distributed basically retired that congregation, and they've kind of assimilated into other similar churches in the area. The trombone choir does uphold their tradition, though. I'm blanking on the name of the gentleman who's running it now, but there is a gentleman who does keep the band alive. He inherited the library, and there's a number of us in town where if he were to call and say, hey, listen, usually these days, unfortunately, it might be for an old congregation member who might have passed, and they're going to play his service, that they might get ex-members of the band together to do a service here and there. So it's still, the tradition has not died in Southern California, but it's on life support.
Now, when you were at Fullerton, you didn't end up around the jazz program at all?
I did it, and I don't mean any disparaging remarks here. It never had the strongest jazz program.
No.
When I was there. Previous to me attending school there, it did. And then when I was there, I don't know why. It just, actually, I know why. It was enrollment. We didn't have big enrollment. It was not, it was a good school, great program, but it never had the numbers. So we never, I think the entire time I was there, we always had trouble even filling an entire big band, you know.
I know when Richard Cruz was teaching, he went on sabbatical for 1 year, went back over to Spain for something or another. And Rusty Stiers filled in as a Dixieland teacher.
Was that Cal State or was that City College?
No, that was Cal State, I'm pretty sure.
It probably was.
Anyway, the only reason I know that is because I went and played piano for the class because they couldn't find anybody wanting to play Dixieland piano. But
okay, yeah. Now, this has always cracked me up. What was your first instrument?
Mine, I was a trumpet player.
Okay, yeah. You see, I've always known you as a tuba player.
Right.
And
no, I played trumpet almost exclusively until my senior year of high school. And I had a band director who would just shift me around on different instruments. He found out that I had a talent for that.
Yeah.
And so by my senior year, I didn't have any solids left in my schedule. I took them all during the summer beforehand.
Yep.
I was playing French horn and flute and trumpet and trap set and the tuba. And then when I got to college, they said, "You're doing what?" Because my first
you're going to be a band director.
I went to Orange Coast College along with, and I think we've talked about this. When I first walked into that jazz band, that was Tom Kubis and Gary Halapoff and Mike Paulson and all these incredible Orange County guys.
And I never played in that band. I was very influenced by Tom Kubis's charts, but I never got to that band.
Yeah, it was a blast. And so, but then that was also band was still also full of Dixieland guys.
Okay.
Dan Barrett and Brian Shaw and Charlie Warren. And,
oh, yeah.
And they kidnapped me and forced me into the darker side.
Okay.
No, but that's where I started playing Dixieland tuba was because of that influence.
Okay.
And then I've since found out I can make a living on tuba, not so much on trumpet in this area.
So, oh yeah. No, I can understand. That makes sense.
But anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
Yep.
But I taught I taught as a coach in many different high schools and marching band guy and jazz band guy, and when you do that, you have to learn a little bit about all the instruments.
Yeah.
So I have pedagogy on almost everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I never really wanted to be a teacher. Like I said, I was always a little bit of a rebel and a reactionary. Like I didn't choose the better jazz school because I didn't want to march, and I didn't, you know, a lot of my decisions were based on things I didn't want to do, which
I think that's called being a teenager.
it was totally being a teenager. It's just ridiculous, and so yeah.
No, I mean, but so what got you kickstarted into improvisation, the others and jazz styles? Was that purely big bands?
No, in fact, one of the stories I wanted to definitely tell today was my parents I was born in Chicago, and before I was a year old, we moved to California, and I lived in Paramount for a few years, and then we moved to Cypress, and then I moved to Long Beach. And so I've always, since I was an infant, I've always lived within about 10 miles of where I live now. But I grew up, it was so funny growing up as a child in Orange County, because the mid 60s in Orange County, it was still fairly undeveloped. It was very agricultural.
Yeah, I was in Huntington Beach then.
What? Okay. I just remember being able to drive from Cypress to Huntington Beach with almost nothing in between.
No freeways, yeah.
No freeways, no shopping centers, most of the housing tracts weren't there yet. But so musically, I listened to a lot of like country music and stuff. We used to go to Knott's Berry Farm and hear the Wagon Masters for free. And so I was growing up with this country music that was happening around me, but my parents had jazz records at home. And my parents were sophisticated urbanites, just starving for jazz in Southern California.
They must have had a bottle of creme de menthe in the refrigerator.
I actually know that. They didn't keep it in the fridge. They kept it in the cabinet way out of the reach of the children, which is smart of them.
I'm just saying my parents did that era also. So.
Yeah, we found it. But so they had a lot of jazz records at home. In fact, one of my favorite albums growing up as a kid was Stan Kenton, Artistry and Rhythm, you know. And I remember living in the old house. That's what we called the apartment in Paramount. We moved to Cypress on my 4th birthday, so I must have been younger than 4.
It's amazing you can remember it.
And I just remember listening to Stan Kenton over and over again. It just blew my mind. I had no frame of reference, but I loved it. But also, the only place they could find trad jazz basically was Disneyland, you know.
Sure.
And
Firehouse 5.
The funny other thing, do you remember the Shakey's Pizza Parlor that was near Knott's Berry Farm?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember when they had that huge organ type contraption? I have the album over here. It was something called the Kaleida Orgasma. Yeah, I've got the album. I could find it, but it was this mad genius who called himself Nickelodeon, but I can't remember his real name. But he built he started with an upright piano, because back in the 60s and 70s, many Shakey's Pizza Parlors, I think they were even union musicians. They used to have a really good duet that would play ragtime piano and banjo at that one. And then, and those same two guys that used to play at the Shakey's played at Knott's Berry Farm, I remember as a kid. And so that wasn't quite, you know, certainly wasn't progressive jazz. It wasn't Stan Kenton. They never took us down to Balboa to hear that stuff, but they took my live music. The first live music that I heard on a regular basis was those guys at Shakey's Pizza. And that strange instrument. And what I would say, this Nick guy, and I must have been 6 at the time. The first thing he built was an upright piano, and he put a bookcase on top of it with bottles that he tuned, and then he attached pulleys and levers to the piano. So when he played a certain octave on the piano, it would also play the bottles above him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then from that, he kept adding things. So he was like a one-man band. So he kept adding things to that. And then somewhere in Southern California, a theater organ at a theater was decommissioned, and he bought that. So he took a theater organ and spent the next year remodeling the inside of that Shakey's and built this huge contraption that had all the literally bells and
Oh
whistles.
yeah, bells and whistles and drums and banjos and violins and.
Yep. And he controlled it all from his keyboard. And then he released an album, which I was very lucky to have. But seeing that genius of a madman totally caught my imagination as a kid. That's another thing that it's like, I have to be a musician. Do you remember those little air-powered organs you used to be able to get at, say, 7-Eleven and stuff? They had like an octave and a half. And, they had chord buttons over here and the keyboard.
Now, was that with bellows or was that with a mouth?
No, they were just plastic organs in the pre-digital days, and they were cheap, and you could plug them in, and it had a wind motor, so the wind created the tones,
right.
Blew over reeds, and it had, like I said, an octave and a half here, and then a bunch of major minor keys, almost like an accordion,
right?
But anyway, I bought one. Saw one of those at a yard sale when I was about 8 and convinced my parents to buy it to me. And I tried adding bells and whistles to it, and it was fun, but it wasn't anything the same. But, that was the first musical instrument I ever tried to build myself, was building my own strange monstrosity based on that guy's work.
I think the organ ones are called orchestrions, maybe.
Okay.
But yeah.
Do you mind if I go get this album? I want to show the people.
Not at all.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Interesting, no?
Yeah. Okay. It's in its vinyl container here, but it was called the Kaleidocosmic Orgrig. And I don't know if you can see this, but that's the musical instrument that this guy built. And this thing, the fish eye opened up, and it was like a slideshow on the inside. Here's the original piano with the bottles on it. He built like a tuba that I think it only played like a big auga sound, but there's drums and organ pipes, and it's just fantastic. It was just wonderful. And his name, Nick Cornwell, and this came out in 1970, so I turned 9 that year. So when the album came out, I was 8. When he was building this thing, I was probably, 6 the first time I heard it.
I'm a little surprised that you haven't tried to do a one-man band thing yourself with the bass drum and the foot pedals and,
One of the weird things about my career is I didn't take a straight ahead path. I had to make my own, thing, which is good because that's how the Boggins came up.
Is that your group?
Well, I'm a founding member of the group, but the group was, officially our founders, though I'm one of the originals, are a duo named Stu Venable and Bill Roper. And all 3 of us were very involved with the independent rock scene in Long Beach in the mid-90s. I was in a couple strange bands called, one of them was Glue Factory Orchestra, and another one was Giant Ant Farm. But both of those groups had a pretty critical success and small followings at the time. Bill Roper was in a band called the Shatners, and Stu Venable was in a band called, I think, The Positions, I think. All independent rock bands in Long Beach. Those 2 were college roommates at Cal State. Bill Roper, do you know Bill Roper? He went to Cal State. He was a bari sax player, but he also played tuba and vocalist back in, same sort of thing, early 80s when they were in school there. But he's gone on to be a bigwig in the gaming community. Both of those guys in their own right. Bill Roper went on to work for Blizzard Entertainment and helped create games like Warcraft, and then he had his own company, and he's currently still with his own company. So but always been a boggard. The Poxy Boggers, if you're a Warcraft fan, if you played the very first original version of Warcraft,
I did.
It clicked on the church. If you clicked on a church, it went Deo gratias, which is I don't know. That's something we he used from us doing Agincourt Carol, which is an ancient song.
Uh-huh.
And he did a lot of the voiceover work on that original game. Bill Roper's done a lot of anyway. And then Stuart Venable is really kind of, I don't know, famous in the GURP community, which, excuse me, but I'm not a D&D fan. GURP, I think, stands for General Universal Role Playing.
Ah.
And so it's like, you know,
I played D&D once in my life.
Exactly. Anyway, those guys, they were college roommates, and they both liked the Renaissance Fair. Stuart at the time was singing in a SATB Renaissance group at the fair, and Bill wanted to do the fair, and they said, hey, let's get an all-male group to, you know, sing drinking songs and, you know, try to meet women. And so that's how we were formed, was to, you know, sing male. And we started off with very legitimate Renaissance madrigals about, you know, drinking and revelry.
Sure.
And but they were very good, clever. They're great songwriters, Stu and Bill, and they collaborated on a whole bunch of really silly, over the years, extremely silly folk songs. But the thing is, you know how you have folk rock bands?
Sure.
We're a rock folk band because we started a folk band, but we were all, like I said, Long Beach rockers at the time. And so we went into singing at the Renaissance Fair, not like your stodgy king singers. We went into it much more with an aesthetic of singing madrigals and drinking songs kind of as an independent rock band, not any sort of folk ensemble. We always had this loud, you know, almost Phil Spector wall of sound kind of aesthetic to folk music, which people enjoy. And,
well, I know my kids do.
Yeah.
They're regaling me with myths and legends about the band.
Yeah.
Which, knowing you, I'm sure they're all true.
Probably. Can you share them on the air? No.
No, I don't think so.
No, we can't.
You know, well, that's really cool. You know, it's really funny. I've interviewed a couple, like Ed Weiss, for example, who plays a lot of early music also.
Okay, yes.
And every time I give that my introduction, I always say, here's somebody who predates trad, you know, which is true, of course. Those styles way predate any turn of the century Dixieland stuff that we may be doing. But that brings us to the DixieDelics.
Okay. Yes.
And you were one of the founding members?
Well, the funny thing about the DixieDelics is, yes, I would say I'm a founding member of the DixieDelics. But the thing about the DixieDelics has always been, it's when I first joined the DixieDelics, 3 of the 6 members, or 4, were in the same family. It's the DixieDelics is headed up by Steve Krause on cornet, trumpet, his brother Dave on woodwinds, and his brother-in-law Bob on tuba. Bob all on tuba.
Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that Bob was his brother-in-law. Okay.
Yeah. No, Bob married his sister Amy, who's a fantastic flute player on her own right, and his other sister is a clarinet player, but she was older than us, and I never got to know her as well. The whole family, all of his siblings are very musical. So, and then when we first started playing with the band, the youngest brother, Captain Krause, and I know his name, I'm just blanking. He played banjo, and he's got his own rock band, a couple different ensembles. He used to play with, I think it was Rosie's Pawn Shop was an independent rock band he was in, and they were fairly critically received. And he's in, with Bob, they're in a kind of folk sea shanty group that's really great. Anyway, they're a very musical family. So yes, we in fact, Dave's wife, Dave All, this woodwind player, his wife is named Beth. And well before they ever met with each other, I worked with her at Tower Records in Anaheim, which is the Tower Records that used to be by
Sure.
And so when they were thinking about, and they both of those brothers had been in Richard Cruz's band.
Right, the Fullerton, the Lemon Street Stompers.
Yes, the Lemon Street Stompers. I was never a stomper, but I was very blessed to have got to know Richard Cruz before he passed, and he liked the band. I don't think we played for his memorial, though we may have, because we've done a lot of memorials over the years. But we did play for Richard Cruz for him at his home as he was ill. And that was very nice.
I did quite a few gigs with Richard, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, we were kind of, and the piano player we had at the time is, God, I am so bad with names. This is a dear friend of mine. But anyway, the guy who played piano was an ex-Lemon Stomper guy too. And I could look up his name, and I see his face. Anyway.
A funny little story. You were already out of the band, and Martha was playing with them.
Yeah.
Well, you might have been in them at the time, at the beginning of this story. He did a concert for Kennedy High School because he knew Bob Anthony,
Okay.
the band director over there. And so he came in and did one of their Pops concerts. And the drummer got in a car accident on his way there.
Oh, no.
And I didn't know those guys at the time, but they showed up to the school and they said, well, we don't have a drummer. We're not sure what we're going to do. Bob Anthony says, just ask Dan over there. He'll play drums for you. So when I first met those guys, they knew me as a drummer. And I played real trad drums for them at this concert at the high school. And so about 10 years later, maybe 15 years later, I get this call. Hello, Dan. I go, yeah. He said, this is Steve Krause, and we're wondering if you'd like to come down to Steamers and play drums for us this coming Sunday. I said, well, yeah. I said, have you got a drum set?
Yeah.
And you hear this pause on the phone because he didn't know I wasn't a drummer.
No, I know. That's one of the things I love about the trad jazz community. The first time I ever played with Larry Wright was at Steamers, and he filled in on piano, and he was incredible. So I figured Larry Wright was a piano player, and then years later I saw him playing something else. And like you said, he plays everything.
And yeah.
And I don't even know, he was originally a percussionist?
Yeah, percussionist and reeds.
Okay, and reeds. Okay, I see. And so of course there's people like Corey Jem, who, the first time I ever met him, he was playing cornet, which is his, I think, his main act.
Yes, it is.
But I think I went and saw him. Actually, who's the lady he plays with? She's kind of like Betty Boop. Janet Klein.
Janet Klein?
Yeah. I went and saw him play with Janet Klein, and he had like a trombone, a saxophone, a whole bunch of toys, and he nailed them all. So there's so many people in this community that double on everything. And
that just comes from calling gigs and not knowing who's going to show up.
Yeah.
It's kind of a testament to flaky musicians, honestly.
But so I started with them probably in the late 90s, because I stopped playing with them in January of 2013. And but we've been doing it. I think we must have started in like 98, because I think I did it 15 straight years. And we played every Friday night and every other Sunday at Steamers for a long time. So that was 6 years, 6 gigs a month with the same folks playing the same literature for over a decade.
Yeah, that's one thing that always thrown me a loop about that band. Because I played a couple of times when Bob couldn't make gigs with them. And that book, it's pretty unchangeable from gig to gig.
Well, yeah. But we added stuff, but it was just still, after that long of doing things, it was time to go. And I've fallen in love with a thing called contra dancing.
Uh-huh. It's
an American folk dance now, but it originally kind of came over as part of English country dance.
Okay.
Once again, when the English came over at the very beginning, they brought their folk dances with them. So there have been contra dances going on a regular basis in America for hundreds of years now. Yes. It has died out and come back, but some communities in America have had a tradition of this type of dance continuously. And I started doing that in 1999. And and just completely fell in love with it. And it's all folk music. There can be some rocky edges, but anyway, so in 2013, I stepped down from the band so I could start producing my own contra dance in San Pedro. So for 3 years, I put on a quarterly dance in San Pedro, and it's just the sort of thing I couldn't do both, you know, and I had to pick one or the other, and I really wanted to do that, and I did. It was hard. I lost money. I help people produce contra dances. I don't produce my own anymore. There's an old joke you can use with almost any industry that's nonprofit or folk related, and it's like, how do you get $1 million in the contra dance business?
Start out with $2 million.
Start off with $2 million.
Yeah. No, as sad as it is, it's unfortunately it's true with a lot of stuff.
It's true.
What was I gonna? Oh, yeah. Bob's called me to do a couple different things. I did the New Orleans club bar in Fullerton a couple times. What's that? The Bourbon Street.
Oh yeah.
And the awful stage. Anyway,
it's not a stage. It's
right. It's a half of a balcony.
It's half. Yeah. No, it's a rough venue. And we used to play there every Friday night, and it would get packed with this college crowd that the last thing they wanted to hear was a trombone solo.
Yeah. At one point in time, he asked me if I would be the regular on that band, and of course I was already committed to Curly's.
Yeah.
And if they're, to my own fault, one thing I am is loyal. But I want to talk a little. Tell me about this James Reese Europe's album you did.
Oh wow! Okay.
Because that is something that band has always intrigued me. The band, you know.
Well, here, I'll be right back.
For those of you who don't know, the James Reese band was a U.S. Army band during World War I believe it was.
Yes.
And it was an all black African-American band from the United States that was in Europe and just a gigantic hit. And I've never heard any of their music.
Okay, well, this is, let me see, what do we call it? The America's Brass Band pays tribute to James Reese Europe's Harlem Hellfighters Band on the 100th anniversary of the Pathé recordings. I think that's how you say it.
Yes,
French. Once again, I've got kind of a strange, not typical career, and a lot of what I've done is historic reenactment type things, historical bands. And I've been very blessed that I've been a member of the America's Brass Band. That's how you see it. Is that going to show up backwards when we? Is
that actually a Civil War era band?
Originally, the America's Brass Band was a Civil War era brass band, what they specialized in. And it was started at Cal State Long Beach, and I can't remember the original director's name, but you know, people like, if you went to Long Beach, you know, Kurt Curtis,
sure,
Tim Catlin, Mitch Masilnikar, a bunch of those guys were some of the original founding members of that ensemble, all basically my age group, and when I heard about them, I wanted to be a member of that band. I just loved historic music. And so eventually I was asked to be a member of that band. But they have not only done Civil War music, they acquired an entire brass band's worth of original 1860s vintage instruments. And then they also have a separate set, and those are high pitched. They're A450.
That's the bell backwards one, correct?
Well, that's one style, but
the horseback,
yeah. And those were because when they marched, the troops would be behind them, so they would march and their bells faced the troops behind them. And but the instruments from that era were pitched a little bit higher than they are now. And then they acquired an entire set of kind of like turn of the century horns, and they did another reenactment, 2 reenactments, complete of the Buffalo Bill Wild West Show Band, and they have an album of that, which uses, once again, his original charts. A lot of those things were published. And then the Dodge City Brass Band. and part of American history is, back before, electricity and stuff, almost every city band or small town had
Sure.
a brass band.
Like the English brass bands, they were community.
Sure.
Right.
And they were the local rock stars. And at the beginning of the Civil War, a lot of town bands joined up with the boys in town to go fight the war. And most of the musicians were non-combatants. Their role was to help with morale, of course. And they were also generally medics, I believe, during battle. They would be medics during battle. But so anyway, I've been a member of the America's Brass Band, and they have a very firm tradition of doing very solid representations of different historic bands. And for the 100th anniversary of World War I, one of our chief scholars in the band was Dr. Richard Berkemeyer, who has just recently retired from Cal State Long Beach. And it's amazing that musicians like James Reese Europe are not household names.
I agree.
In fact, at the end of the World War I, in New York City at least, and many parts of Europe, he was a household name.
Yes.
He was a big hit. And he was one of the, I think he led, even before World War I, once again, fact checkers, please keep me honest. But he was already a leading musical force in New York City. And he was very much believed that people of color needed their own ensembles, and I believe the first all black ensemble that played at Carnegie Hall was one of his groups. I don't think it was necessarily a jazz band, but it was
Right.
an all black ensemble playing compositions by black composers. Now the thing is, they were writing in the style of the day, but it was, once again, it was them doing it, not
Yes.
just,
In fact, a lot of the reviews of that time talk about the fact that their feel for the music was so different than the normal bands of
Yeah.
the time.
Yep. And so he was quite an established musician in the big times before the war, but much like the Civil War, he joined. World War I starts, he joined, and not surprisingly, the black regiments in World War I saw some of the most action. And even though they were musicians, they were put in harm's way, and they made it through. But they also brought their music and jazz they are kind of pretty much what brought jazz to Europe at the time. And I think by the end of the war, I'm not 100% sure, but I think by the end of the war, his band was popular enough not to be in the trenches and to be basically
A musical unit, right?
a musical unit that was representing America and America's music. Then they came back to America and they started recording with Pathé Records, and they recorded a whole bunch of stuff right off the bat when they came home. And this is the tragedy, is that he was at a gig one night. I think they still had more recordings planned. And the story I heard was that he kind of criticized one of his, I think it was a drummer. And the drummer didn't like what he said, and he attacked James Reese Europe with a tiny little penknife and nicked him in the throat.
No.
Unfortunately, he nicked him in the throat at the carotid artery or something, and they could never stop the bleeding, and he died. And I believe he was the first Black American in the country that had like a ticker tape parade. He had a parade in New York City when he died. And once again, he had a tremendous influence on jazz and music in America. And unfortunately, because of the times, he only had a few records that they recorded before he died. They may have been influential, but his legacy ended. death, not his legacy, but his ongoing influence stopped at his death, and then the world changed. You know, the Depression, the Depression, World War II, things moved on, and even people influenced with him didn't really credit him. And even the music he made is kind of categorized as proto jazz.
I learned about him because I was given a book that was actually published by an Englishman that was supposed to be talking about the history of big bands, and they started this volume with him.
Yeah.
And that's how I got turned on to it. And I just read about that band and went, this is crazy. This is so cool, you know?
Yep. And so what the America's Brass Band did, and mostly to the benefit of Richard Berkemeyer, was on the 100th anniversary of the recordings and the end of World War I, we tried to, as faithfully as possible, went and recreated some of the songs. And we tried to be as faithful as we could to his recordings. I am very, once again, blessed that I got to record 2 vocals on this. I sing How You Gonna Keep 'Em Down on the Farm and On Patrol in No Man's Land, which was an original. His singer at the time was Lieutenant Noble Sissel. And
Sure.
the song was written by Lieutenant James Reese Europe, Lieutenant Noble Sissel, and Yugi Blake. And I got a chance, and it's this lighthearted ditty about walking through no man's land during World War I.
Lighthearted, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and it is. It's a lighthearted ditty about being in the trenches in World War I, and so, but it's available. It's let's see. It's Cambria Master Recordings. I actually have a website which I haven't updated in about a year, but there's links to this there. And after this show, I'll just put up something that's a little simpler that has, you know, maybe some links from the end of this show.
Now, is that available like on CD Baby or Amazon or any of those things?
I believe it's actually, I'm the band's merchandise.
Okay. So through your website would be the easiest way for them to get it.
Exactly, but I don't even think we have that up to date. So if your viewers would like a recording of this, you can go to the Cambria Master Recordings website, www.cambriamuse.com, and definitely get it there. But I think we're authorized to sell copies, and I'd be more than happy to sell you a copy on behalf of the band. But I will go update my website, so there's definitely a link to this, to the Boggins, to the DixieDelics, you know, anything we talk about today. It may not be pretty, but there'll be links people can go reference to find out more about these things.
Well, make a note to yourself to bring one the next time we play together.
Absolutely. No, I will. I'll bring a box of them.
We're getting kind of close out of time here,
Okay.
but I want to talk about you being on the house band for the Eric Andre show.
Wait. Everything is here. If you go to jerrywheeler.com today, I haven't taken it down yet. There's a clip, I believe, of the Eric Andre show where I appear with Henry Rollins. It's absurd. It's anybody who hasn't seen it, please go see the Eric Andre show. It is, how would you describe it? It's deconstructionist, end of times comedy. It's just bizarre.
Saturday Night Live on crack.
Yeah. Well, it's a deconstructed dystopic view of talk shows.
Right.
And I was in the house band for 3 years, but it was a kind of a high concept comedy, and they even though I appear in the clip with Henry Rollins, and I had a wonderful conversation with him the day we were on set together, the piece as it's shown on television never happened. They pieced together my reactions from here, the performance there, and that's how we did the entire show. I hope I'm not giving away any trade secrets. Sorry, Eric. But
well, you'll see no such editing on this show. So.
Okay, fabulous experience. Actually, but I wanted to share a story about my reason I fell in love with jazz and my parents.
Oh, please do.
This ties into Eric Andre show, because when I was talking to Henry Rollins that day, I told him this story, which was one of the places I love to hear jazz trad jazz especially, was Disneyland, because I could sit down and talk to Teddy Buckner. And Teddy Buckner was one of the originals. Even if he was only a kid when the originals were doing it, he was still a New Orleans guy.
Oh, yeah.
In New Orleans. Growing up, that first generation of jazz greats is who influenced him. And he influenced me. But my mom, growing up into Chicago, they grew up in a different time. I love my grandparents, but they were not as open-minded as we are today. And she used to have to hide the fact that she was listening to jazz. Her parents didn't want her listening to that kind of music.
Oh, no, devil's music.
Yeah. And so there's somebody on my porch. That's odd. Okay. And
Sentence I don't hear every day. Oh.
Yeah. People were wandering into my home, but this is Long Beach. It's normal. And so anyway, my mother grew up in Chicago, and she was a tremendous jazz fan. She was born in 1937. And when she was, I think, in high school, she snuck out of the house to go hear Louis Armstrong play. And she couldn't, I think she took the bus, didn't have enough money to get in. So she listened from outside all night long, and then realized after the concert was done that she heard from outside, the bus to her house was no longer running.
Oh,
and
no.
So she was stuck in Chicago in a neighborhood that was not hers, with no way to get home. So she sat down on the curb and started crying. And then as she's sitting there crying, this big car pulls up, and Louis Armstrong sticks his head out the window and says, little girl, what's wrong? Are you in trouble? And she goes, I came to see your concert. I couldn't get in. No, I can't get home. Anyway, he gave her a ride home. Louis Armstrong gave my mom a ride home. And she told me these stories just growing up as a kid. And she also, there was some famous piano player that was friends with her father. There was a white jazz pianist, but anyway, she grew up with so much just loving jazz, taking me to jazz all the time. And that was her brush with Louis Armstrong. And I grew up hearing stories like that from her. My dad was a bartender at a college on State Street in Illinois, which back in the 50s was a pretty swanky, it was where all the young hip people were. And there was a bar called the College of Complexes, I believe. And he was right down the street from all the jazz clubs. And I don't know, they were just huge jazz fans that were jonesing for jazz once they got to California, and took me to all, things like that. And we'd go to Disneyland in the morning and with the whole family. And then at night, my mom and I would go back and just sit and listen to jazz in New Orleans Square until they stopped, and those were some of my greatest memories as a kid. But even just in high school, once again, I took my youth so for granted. My high school had those great concerts I mentioned. And then I could go to Disneyland, and at the Carnation Plaza, I heard Stan Kenton,
Sure.
Count Basie,
Maynard Ferguson,
Toshiki Akiyoshi.
I love that band.
All of these great world-class jazz bands. And I just thought it was normal. I thought everybody had this in their life. And it turns out they didn't. And when it was gone, it was gone. But somewhere around the house, I have Count Basie and Stan Kenton's autograph. And
Yeah, but you're right. As a kid, it's just your normal childhood,
Yeah.
It was funny. My family shows up to Curly's like once a year, because usually on my birthday, because my daughter talks them into coming down here.
Uh-huh.
And, Eileen and all those fans that are down there all the time go up to my family and go, what do you think you're dead? What do you think? And my daughter will roll her eyes and she goes, it's just my childhood. But they grew up with hanging out with Dan Barrett and Brian Shaw and Charlie Warren and all these guys. And it's a funny story, since we're sharing stories here. My son used to be one of the assistants at Warren High School, band assistants. Mm-hmm. And one day he calls me up on the phone. He goes, Dad, I just heard the greatest trumpet player I've ever heard. I said, oh yeah, who is it? He goes, it's Kai Palmer. I said, say hi. Say hi for me. He goes, what? I said, just say hi for me.
Yeah.
So he walks up to Kai.
Hold on just a second. People are knocking at my door. Hi.
Someone's knocking at my door.
No, it's in the back upstairs. Yep. Yeah, there's an open house, and they confused me for the open house because the windows are open because it's hot. Anyway,
Did you tell them to get off your porch?
I did. Very nice.
And so my son walks up to him because my dad says to say hello and rolls his eyes. And Kai goes, "Who's your father?" He goes, "Oh, Dan Zeilinger." He goes, "Dan Zeilinger? I haven't seen him." Goes on for about 5 minutes about me.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I love about just the music industry is that you can have deep personal friends you haven't seen in a decade and pick up the conversation where you left it off 10 years ago, and so.
And that's particularly true of musician friends.
Mm-hmm.
Our time that is spent together, let's see if I can phrase this so it makes sense, is so soulful and connected as musicians that it's not something you forget. I mean, I can be on stage for one gig with somebody, and it's something I'll carry the rest of my life.
Exactly, and there is an intimacy, a shared intimacy in creating. I mean, music is a collaborative art form. There's soloists, but what we do, group improvisation. Wow, when you're clicking on all cylinders. With people that you played with for decades or people that you just met, because even the tradition then, the world's a small place and, we were influenced by the same people, even if it's the jazz greats from 100 years ago, but even them, the teachers and everything, how it all fits together, anybody playing trad jazz and you're clicking on all cylinders, you got to guarantee that you've got some mutual friends.
Oh, sure. I try to explain to people why it is we do this, other than the fact that it's just part of who we are. But it's those goosebump moments.
Oh yeah.
Where everything clicks and you uncontrollably get goosebumps when everything happens. It could be concert band, it could be orchestra, it could be hammered dulcimer.
Yep.
Just those moments when your emotions leave your control and your body says, "This is it."
And the thing is,
that's the addictive moments for me.
Oh yeah, no, there's a spiritual aspect going back to the Moravians and the Indians. When you hear music that's just, it's about as close to perfection sometimes. And because, I don't know, there's something extremely spiritual and about music. It is the language of God. And so
I agree.
Don't want to step on anybody's toes out there, but
No. I mean, there's got to be a reason all these churches have so much music.
Yeah, it's a joyful noise.
I mean, just to put it in a wide spectrum, how many religious organizations do you know that don't incorporate music into their services?
Yeah. Very few, and none that I want to be part of.
No, I wouldn't want to be a Quaker, and if I did, I'd probably end up dancing. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. No, I'd offend them somehow.
Well, listen, Jerry, this has been fun, man. I'm going to have to sign off here.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I'm glad we had a chance to just chat with just the two of us instead of on a table full of musicians.
Absolutely. For your kids' benefit, we just released the latest Poxy Boggins CD this week.
Oh.
Songs of Vice and Ire. And so I'll post a bunch of silly links on a very inadequate webpage soon. And I got to get to that thing for CJ and the Cherry Willow boys.
Yeah, I just hope that I want that gig to start up again.
Yeah.
If nothing else for our fans that are so diehard. All right, sir.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. And
get you down the lane,
I appreciate it.
Down the road.
You take care now.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, sir.
Take care.
Thank you for watching Trad Jazz Today. Dan shows new interviews every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Make sure to check out the archive of past shows, and please give us a thumbs up when you subscribe to the channel. Bye.